Hey, Sean here from the Commander's Brew. Welcome to the Dominaria United set review. I'm going to give you a bunch of quick takes on how to brew some of the new commanders. Some of these ideas will be a little more serious and a little bit more fleshed out than the other ones. Right, and Darksteel Eric's here too. Ooh, hey, I'm going to interrupt and say that yes, we know you represent Darksteel Industries and you are technically my boss because I signed a contract without reading it, but this is a dense episode and a lot of people stop watching if we talk too long. So can we not do this time? Okay, thank you. Okay, this episode is basically split into two halves. The first half is going to be the legendaries that come from the commander decks and the box toppers. And the second half is going to be the legendaries that are in the actual packs, the ones you can draft with. There's too many products. I don't know what they're called. Draft packs. Xira, the Golden Sting. This is a Jund commander with haste, which is nice because we've got that attack trigger, not to mention the creepiest token in the history of the game. I'd be tempted to put extra combats in to get an extra ability, but since you're just really drawing cards, I think this is better to be looked at as just a generic Jund value commander. I'm most likely going to put egg counters on my own stuff and just turn them into extra cards as I sacrifice them for stuff. Then we've got Verrak Warped Sengir. That's a ton of keywords in the command zone, so I probably want to have Audric Lunarch Marshal in the 99. And that weird ability letting you pay life a second time to repeat an ability doesn't matter if that's all you pay anyway. I mean, if I can pay life 10 times to do the effect 10 times, this is letting me do it 20 times, but I always could. This is for things that have extra costs like mana tapping or just sacrificing something. I don't know. It does make every fetch land fetch 2 lands for the price of 2 life. It's solid ramp for free, sort of free. Life gain feels free in Commander because we start with so much of it. But if you can front the budget, I think you want to run every single fetch land that hits white or black. When I say fetch land, I mean the expensive ones. A Terramorphic expense won't do anything because you're not paying life to do it. Chainer's a pretty cool one. We get to save on that mana by paying 6 life and getting 2 things back from the graveyard. And I think Vilis and Razaketh, although repeatable effects, they do cost mana and or sacrificing a creature. So we get to kind of pay half price. Half the number of sacrificed creatures or half the number of mana spent. Next up is Tor Wauki the Younger. Since Tor's ability allows us to do 1 extra damage whenever we do non-combat damage, and whenever we cast a spell we get to fling 2 damage to any target, that 2 turns into 3, so this guy doesn't shoot arrows, he shoots lightning bolts. I think this is our Rakdos Spellslinger commander. I'm definitely going to want to run stuff that does extra damage, a ton of instants and sorceries, and technically, because it's damage, something like Pyrohemia is fantastic. If we can give Tor Indestructible, we can do 2 damage to each creature and player by just paying a red. An important note, it doesn't say opponents, so we will be doing the damage to ourselves by the extra 1 as well. Let's talk Torsten, founder of Benalia. I think this is the person who invented banding. It's a hefty cost for a commander, but revealing 7 and putting all the creatures and lands into our hand is pretty good. That dies trigger kind of implies that Torsten is actually 7 soldiers wearing a huge trench coat, but the ability is still strong. We're going to want a dense land and creature deck. We just want as many hits as possible. So we'll definitely want to run creatures that can play extra lands like Azusa Lost But Seeking or maybe the Dryad of Elysian Grove. It's about $30 for the pair, but it certainly makes the deck run a lot smoother. And if we do have room for instants or sorceries, they're probably going to be in the form of some sort of blink, which operates as a form of protection, but even better, something like Brought Back. If we let Torsten die, we get those 7 soldiers, we bring it back from the graveyard. Lady of Otaria is fascinating because this is a dwarf commander, not a dwarf herself. She's the avatar of dwarves. Seems very tall though. Being able to get around paying the actual mana value is pretty awesome on a commander. We still have to pay the additional tax as this keeps going back and forth from the command zone, but being able to tap a bunch of dwarves to do it and only pay 2 the second time, it's pretty good. Obviously we want fetch lands. This time we can run the cheap fetch lands. And we're going to want a ton of dwarves because revealing 4, we only can hit dwarves, so that's what we want. I think obviously you run all 7/7 dwarves. And there's also some heavy hitting dwarves that have come out recently. Stormkiln Artist if we have a few extra instants and sorceries in the deck. Torbrand Thane of Redfell just helps with damage from red things. And of course Magda. If you're running a dwarf deck, Magda has to be in the deck. The question is, do we run any dragons though? I don't know. Any huge artifacts? That's more likely. Dwarven Recruiter is a fascinating old card that lets you put a different dwarf on top, which is perfect for Lady of Otaria. And if you run out of fetch lands, there is a lot of weird old dwarves that destroy lands like Dwarven Driller. and that is the key of Lady Otaria. A land has to go to the graveyard. I'm running all these super old dwarves has got to be pretty cheap. So maybe with all that money we save, we spring for a Crucible of Worlds so we can play them back out of our graveyard. Crucible plus fetch lands, that's a combo. Tetsuo Imperial Champion. I'm actually not going to go too deep on this card because this is next week's episode. Stay tuned. But needless to say, we're going to want to have heavy equipment to take advantage of the 2 abilities. We're going to cast some free spells, and we're going to throw damage around. There's some really fun stuff in that deck. Maybe subscribe so you know when the next episode comes out. I don't know. Stangg Echo Warrior is very cool. Like all of the Dominaria United commanders, they have some sort of throwback to an old card, and all of the Stangs through the history of the game have had another Stangg buddy, a twin. And this one's no different. But the key here is that not only do we get that extra Stangg for the combat step, but we copy all of the equipment and auras that are on it. That's really cool. The newly printed Reaver Cleaver is excellent, because the new Stang's going to hit with it as well, make a bunch of treasure tokens, and then we can just keep going. And I think Pattern of Rebirth is the perfect aura on original Stangg, because getting this on the copy ensures that when we have to sacrifice it at the end of the turn, we get a free 3-drop or less onto the battlefield. Onto the battlefield. Shanid Sleeper's Scourge is a nice Mardu commander. The menace is nice, but the key ability here is that every time you cast a legendary spell, you draw a card and lose a life. Not only that, that works for legendary lands that you just play. That's sort of free land draw. You pay a life. Life is free in Commander, right? So I had to look at how many legendary lands there were in Mardu colors. There's 40. They don't all make sense in the deck. I mean, things like Paliano, the High City, or Eye of Ugin don't really tap for mana. Quite literally in Paliano because we didn't draft it. And if you don't have any Eldrazi's, Eye of Ugin doesn't actually tap for mana either. But then there's something like this one, Untadaki the Cloudkeeper. It also has a very specific condition in order to tap for mana, but since we're probably playing only legendary spells, that shouldn't be a huge problem. And there's quite a few legendary lands that actually make colored mana. 3 of them make red mana, 6 of them make black mana, and 5 of them make white mana. I'm not counting the one that's banned in white. I guess that's 4 if you don't want to drop the $300 on a Sarah's Sanctum. But even then, if you don't have the enchantments, it doesn't tap for mana. Even if you can squeeze 20 legendary lands in, and I think that's pretty easy, your hand's going to be full the whole game. Not bad. Ramses Assassin Lord. I'm not sure what I want to do with this commander. There isn't a ton of assassins off the top of my head, but that when someone loses the game, if you attacked with an assassin, you win the game, that's pretty neat. And just so happens, Itra the Silencer is an assassin that can cause a lose the game trigger, which will turn into a win the game trigger. Look, it's already not easy to win with Itrata. That's an achievement unlocked if there ever was one. Ohabi Caleria is an elf archer that untaps all of our archers during each player's untap step. So obviously we're going to want to look for archers that tap to do something. There aren't that many super exciting ones, but one of the bottom ranked archers in the game of Commander is Arbalest Elite. I think we finally found your home. It doesn't untap during your next untap step, but who cares about that? And we'll get to do 3 damage to an attacking or blocking creature each combat if we have 9 to 12 mana open every turn. I guess the move is to attach things to these archers that lets them tap for other things besides archer things, mana and whatnot. Jedit Ojanen Mercenary. This is a Bant commander, greens in the text box. Again, we're going to want to play a ton of legendary creatures, but I think no matter how you go, you're going to want to put Tangleroot in this deck. Now you're casting those legendaries. Tangleroot pays you the green, which you use to make that 2/2 cat token with Forest Walk. Again, there's so many legendaries to choose from. What else we're going to do with the deck? Don't know yet. Let's move on. Hazezon, Shaper of Sand. This is our Naya commander with Desert Walk. You can play desert lands from your graveyard, so we're definitely going to want to run those cycling deserts. And unless our opponents do too, that Desert Walk won't do much. But being able to make triple colored tokens reminds me a lot of Wart the Raid Mother. What I did forget about Wart though is that it only works when we cast green or red instant or sorcery spells. So unfortunately we don't get to convoke, copy white spells, unless they're also green or red. So I had a quick look. The Naya ultimatum is Titanic Ultimatum, which is arguably the worst of all the ultimatums, but 2 copies is nice. Cadric Soul Kindler. So seeing that the legend rule doesn't apply to tokens you control makes me want to copy things, but we don't have blue in the commander identity, so that's a little bit out the door. Then you read further and you realize why. We get a second copy of every legendary we play for 1 extra mana. we do have to sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So if it's a wicked combat creature, maybe Aurelia the War Leader, we're going to get all of that value for an extra 1. And don't forget they have haste, so in Oswald Fiddlebender, we get to make the non-legendary copy and still sack an artifact to get a bigger artifact out there. Put a little blink synergies in there, we get to do this multiple times. It's a decent commander. Bladewing Deathless Tyrant. A pricey dragon skeleton commander to be sure, but this is a big ability. We've got haste in the command zone, so our opponents have to always watch out for this thing coming in when we get close to 7 mana. Because we're certainly going to build a deck so that every time we hit, we get a ton of these zombie knights with menace. That's why I think you got to look at this like a menace deck. Sonorous Howlbonder and Labyrinth Raptor are 2 creatures from Ikoria that really help the menace strategy. I mean, if you got both of these, they kind of have to block with a billion creatures in order to trade with something. Being able to pump the team like that, it's pretty good. Ayesha Tanaka, Armorer. I'm going to start with the last clause there. Not being able to be blocked if a defending player controls 3 or more artifacts seems pretty easy. Let's assume we can always get through someone with Ayesha. So now, since we're able to look at as many cards as their power, and artifacts are the hits, we're going to want to run a lot of equipment that pumps power. I mean, for my money, Blackblade Reforged and Stratascythe both grant the most power for the least equip. Probably. You always know what you're going to get with Blackblade Reforged. Sometimes Stratascythe comes up a little short. People don't run a ton of basics. But depending on your meta, this might be a card that gives +10/+10 at minimum, especially if the decks line up right. Okay, those are all the cards that don't come from just cracking regular packs, the old-fashioned way of getting new cards. Commander decks, box toppers, I don't even know. Hey, me again, Darksteel Eric, just reminding you to like and subscribe. It really helps out Darksteel Industries. And now, 2 ads, 1 fake, 1 real. Do you need lots of energy? Would you like to be able to do things faster, like running, jumping higher, just being able to go, go, go? Well, try Athletic Browns from Darksteel Industries. Brown sometimes refers to artifacts, so this is an artifact. Phyrexian shoes that will assimilate with your legs and help you run faster, jump higher, and you can never take them off. Plus, they probably give you haste and hexproof. That seemed like a cool card. Boots that give you haste and hexproof. And now the real ad from the Wizards Tower, wizardtower.com. Not only are they a great site to get content like deck techs and cool articles, we've got a great coupon code for our Canadian listeners. Use code BREWDOUBLE to get 5% off your Magic singles if you spend $20 or more. The Wizards Tower. They've always got energy to send your cards to you. And now back to the show. So now let me go through the cards that you can open in traditional ordinary packs. Astor, Bearer of Blades. Now this is a Boros commander. ETB, look at 7 cards and you get an equipment or a vehicle from them. And equipment equips for 1 and vehicles crew for 1. So obviously we want to look for the greatest disparity between the equip costs and what they cost to cast. So for vehicles, Consulate Dreadnought only costs 1 to play, and to crew 1 to get that 7/11. Love those taquitos. That's a pretty good rate. Colossal Plow, same deal. Cheap to cast, expensive to crew, but the plow pays us off nicely when we do. And then in terms of equipment, Helm of the Host is a classic piece of equipment. I think one of the only things holding this back from being in almost every deck is that hefty equip cost. But if the equip is 1, and Blade of Selves, same deal. We don't have to equip to a legendary creature, Astor. We can equip to any creature we want. Ivy Gleeful Spellthief is very interesting. Her copy ability triggers when anybody casts a spell with a single target. The copy has to target Ivy, so we will only want to do this for positive single target spells. People don't run those in mass quantities in Commander unless they do something really specific for the deck. So we either brew something specific that wants single target spells, or maybe we do something like Eye of the Storm. We play a single target spell that is positive. We play the first one on one of our creatures and the copy hits Ivy. Now our opponents, whenever they play things, they can copy those spells on their own creatures, but if they do, they have to give us one as well that will also hit Ivy. It is a May though, so maybe they'll never do it. It's actually kind of hard to find spells that are single target that are positive that you'd want to run in Commander. I mean, if we want to do this Eye of the Storm thing, do we run Snakeskin Veil? That means that we give our opponents the ability to get hexproof with any instant spell. Sure, Ivy gets hexproof and we get to amass +1/+1 counters, which isn't nothing, but are we giving our opponents too much? Jhoira Ageless Innovator is real cool. So obviously it's about getting as many ingenuity counters on Jhoira as possible. Or is it? Is it? See what I did there? You put 2 on the first tap and you put out a free 2-drop artifact. Cool. It's tempting to run a bunch of proliferate effects and get this thing up to 1 million tokens right away, but there just aren't that many artifacts that cost 1 million. I'm not sure how useful this is once we get past 6 or 8 mana. So it's for that reason I'd rather run untappers. Rather than proliferate all those counters, I'd rather put 2 on, get a free 2-drop, maybe use something like Captain of the Mists to untap Jhoira and put another 4-drop out for free. Like I said, once we get to 6 or 8, we just don't need any more counters. And then we get to run something like Aetherworks Marvel if we've got untappers as well. We'll have plenty of artifacts coming in, so we'll generate a ton of energy, and being able to untap this and use it twice is pretty big game. We will have some big artifacts in the deck, because Jhoira can play them for free. This one seems pretty cool. I think I'm going to do an episode on it. Jhoira the Unifier. This card screams shenanigans. Makes your legendary creatures huge, because we're going to have a ton of legendaries, and basically has legendary cascade. You cast a legendary from your hand. It has to be from your hand. I didn't notice that the first time. And you cascade into a smaller legendary. Put it straight into the battlefield. Technically, you are casting it, but for free. Your opponents can counter it. But this is just shenanigans. I don't know what to do with it. Do whatever you want. It's awesome. King Darien XLVIII. That means 48. But whenever I see numbers written out like this, it reminds me of the Super Bowl, and Super Bowl 48 happens to be Broncos versus Seahawks. The Seahawks won. Huge upset. So this is a Super Bowl deck. You want the Seahawks? There's tons of Hawks in the game for you to choose from. Broncos are a bull, which remind me of a beast or an elk, sort of. So we could do elks, we could do beasts. Broncos also make me think about white Ford Broncos that are just on the run. So maybe we sneak in one untethered express as a little cheeky nod to that incident. And the only question remaining is, what do we do about the halftime show? Bruno Mars and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Do we put cards in that represent them? Or when we get to 20 life, do we take 1 hour off of the game and just play a bunch of tunes? Dance around a little bit. Bit rude, but tempting. Lagomos, Hand of Hatred. So we do get a 2/1 red elemental on our turn every combat. We're not always going to get to attack with it, but we have to sacrifice it at the end step. That's key because we get a free tutor by tapping Lagomos if 5 or more creatures died. So we got that elemental that's going to die for sure. And then if we cast something like Fleshbag Marauders in a 4-player game, everyone has at least 1 creature, then that's 4 creatures died from Fleshbag. The little elemental dies. That's a free tutor that turn, just from casting that 1 card. I mean, it's not super useful to find the other parallels for Fleshbag Marauder, because then we're sort of spinning wheels. But I think that's an easy enough option. Another cool way to get a bunch of creatures sacked in 1 turn is Shadowborn Apostles. There's already tons of decks with 1 million Shadowborn Apostles in them. That's a $3 card. That's down to $2.50. Thank you, Double Masters. But we're sacking 6 of them at a time, so that definitely triggers a tutor. But now since we have access to red, we can get the red demons like Rakdos the Showstopper. We're halfway to a demon deck anyway, so these coin flips can't hit our demons, and hopefully we've got most of them on the table. Lagomos, unfortunately, a human shaman. Soul of Windgrace is a peculiar Jund commander. It's got a lot of hoops you want to jump through. I'm not sure what I'd do entirely, but I think my temptation would be to try to get as many blinking effects as possible to just get lands in that way. It's tough without white. Or blue, though. It's almost like they thought of it. Tetiova, Steward of Tides. Tetiova from the Dominaria we got last was a heavy hitter in the world of Commander. And this one is not as powerful. I mean, it can't be. That bar is too high. But land creatures you control have flying. I would have written that as creatures that are lands you control have flying. When I first read that, I was like, ground creatures have flying? Like creatures without flying have flying? It makes sense in terms of the game, but it's a weird sentence. So we'll definitely control 7 lands by like turn 3 because we're Simic. And then I think you just want to play a ton of cards that put lands into play. They'll most likely be tapped, but you want to run all the Nissas that turn lands into creatures. That means they'll have flying. Stuff like Rude Awakening to turn all of my lands into creatures, which will have flying. And then maybe some of those Awaken cards to actually also make lands into land creatures another way. It's kind of like a fair Tetiova. A little bit on the aggressive side. Seems fun. I think I'll do an episode on this one too. Okay. And the last card is Xira Eternal Schemer. If you didn't see last week's deck, it didn't start as a Xira Eternal Schemer deck because this card got previewed as I was making the episode. It was an Urtai the Corrupted Sagas deck, but needless to say, Xir works even better in a Sagas deck. We get to run some really powerful Sagas that our opponents may want to kill, but we can save them by giving them hexproof with 1 and a white. Not to mention them having them attack if they're pretty big. I mean, I would love to swing in with a hexproof Kiora Best the Sea God. That chapter 2 though. Tap all 9 land permanents, target opponent controls. Ooh. It's a fun discussion for who gets to be the one who gets tapped. You find out who your friends are at the table in a quick second that way. And that does it. That's all the commanders I kind of wanted to talk about. There's a ton of other ones I didn't mention because the brews seemed a little bit straightforward or I just couldn't think of anything cool. But if I do, you can be sure I'll do an episode on it. I've already earmarked a few of these episodes, but stay tuned for even more of them. And in the meantime, you keep being you. The world is a better place for it. See you next time.